Well, a very good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are tuning in from. My name is Adrian Reed, and a very warm welcome to this BA Community webinar. There's a topic that I'm sure many of us are thinking about or have thought about over the previous months and years, and that is agility. And I have to say, in terms of numbers, this is probably one of the most, if not the most popular webinar that we've ever run. So I know it's a topic that's very dear to all of our hearts. So we're going to be talking not specifically about Agile today, but about business agility. And we're going to talk about how that sort of transcends or goes beyond individual methods and tools. And I'm really pleased to say we've got two experts, two thought leaders joining us tonight. So we have Lynn Girvan. A lot I could say about Lynn. Lynn is Head of Business Analysis and Lead Agile Coach for CMC Partnership Consultancy Limited, co-author of the BCS book Agile and Business Analysis, which I'm sure many of us will have read, and a well-known and very, very popular keynote speaker. I can still remember, Lynn, when I first saw you speak at the BA Conference Europe, and there was a bit in your presentation where it was like, and then the magic happens and the backlog is produced. And that was probably about 10 years ago. I saw that presentation or something insane. So fantastic. I'm also very pleased to say we have Karim Harbott with us, who's a business agility and innovation coach, non-executive director at the Scrum Alliance and founding partner of Agile Center, a global Agile consulting and training firm, as well as being, of course, trainer, author, and international keynote speaker as well. So very, very warm welcome, Lynn and Karim. Thank you very much for joining today. So before we get started, if you are on live, please do feel free to ask questions. We're just basically going to riff and have a conversation, but just join in, add your questions and we'll cover as many as we can. So we'll start, because of course the topic of this webinar is business agility beyond methods and tools. So the first question I'd ask is really, what is business agility? Why should we care? And how does it differ from Agile in inverted commas?
Karim, feel free to start.
well deferred.
That's a nice small question to get going with. Thank you there. No, I've got a great start, right? Because I actually get asked this question a lot. What is the difference between business agility and Agile? So, as we know, Agile came from the software development world, the Manifesto for Agile software development, right? But for me, the kind of the values and the principles and the mindset of what those 17 were created in 2001 in Snowbird can be applied way beyond software, right? And when you look at organizations today, whether they know it or not, every product that they have, every service that they have, every business model that they have has a shelf life, right? And that, I don't care if it's Microsoft Windows, Microsoft Excel, Amazon.com, there will come a day where they don't make any money off that, right? And the question is, given we know that time scale is getting shorter and shorter and shorter, right? You can't rely on it forever. How good are you as an organization at creating new products, new services, new business models that will be able to keep the pipeline of revenue on, to keep serving your customers when those old ones don't make you any money anymore, right? Or are you going to be like Kodak, who couldn't make that switch? Are you going to be like BlackBerry? Are you going to be like Nokia? Right? Because that's happening, and it's happening at an alarmingly quick rate. So business agility is, how do I set my organization up to be responsive as an organization in terms of whole business models, not just software, right? How do I set my organization up to be high performing, engaging, responsive, to innovate, as well as keeping the lights on today? And that steps up from software, that steps up to the whole organization. And we'll talk as we go about all of the areas that touches, but that is the same values and the same principles that we know and love at the software level, but just applied to the enterprise as a whole. That's how I explain the concept.
Fantastic. So more sort of holistic, a more systemic type of agility. Anything to add, Lynn?
Well, not that much, but I think change. Organisations have been responding to change for decades. I don't think this is a new thing, but I think it's the pace and the rate at which they need to change now, which is a game changer. And I think for many years, we've moved away from fixed multi-year programs now towards continual change. And I think that's been something that organizations have really struggled with. And they need to be able to adapt and respond in a way that they haven't had to. And it's not good enough now just to enhance products and services. That's not going to keep them on track. They really need to think about their consumers, their customers more. They need to think at things at point of value, at point of delivery, understand their customers' needs and wants from the customer's perspective, just to stay in the game. They can't just enhance their products and services to stay in the game anymore. So innovation and those things are really key. And I agree with what Karim says. It definitely is a whole organization and thing, and it doesn't start with software either. I think it starts with leadership. I think that's quite key.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. As you were talking there, Lynn, I was thinking of examples I've seen in my own life as a consumer, where it's really clear that there's been a focus put on, you kind of get a sense that something's been delivered in quite an agile and digital way, and you can just almost see that there's an agile team in there. But the interface between what happens then and the organization is really poor. So for example, like an example I always give is like, there are some hotel brands out there where the online booking experience is great, and then you turn up and they can't find your reservation, or and it's like, well, actually that's solved a very small part of the problem in a very compartmentalized way. And I was also thinking, both Karim and Lynn, when you were speaking there, about not just business model threats, but if you take like COVID-19 for example, if I think about the clients I work with, they had a number of reactions. Some started to see it coming and made preparations, or started to mitigate risks. Others were really sort of shocked when they suddenly had to remote work and didn't necessarily have those things in place. Whereas some of them, it was like, well, we've actually, although we didn't know COVID was coming, we knew that something like this was a possibility, and we had a response in place. So would you say that things like responding to environmental change, like COVID or whatever the next COVID is also related to business agility?
I think yes. I think those organisations that have adapted better probably have good, strong leadership. They've probably got some of the culture things in place that's needed. They might not consider themselves in the throes of business agility, or consider themselves even an agile organisation, but they probably have things in place that's enabled that. And those things that they probably have in place are the things that organisations need for business agility. And just coming back slightly to what I was saying earlier about it's not good enough just to enhance products and services, it's really about understanding the customer experience. Those organizations that understand the experience that the customer is going to get from the experience in obtaining the product and service is just as key as well to that organization surviving. So it's really about looking at all of those aspects, like a service thinking aspect as well, not just services and products.
Absolutely.
Agree entirely. Just to jump in on that, you're right. There are ways of setting up organizations that allow you to move quickly and to respond, and there are ways that do the exact opposite, right? And the organizations that have been able to respond to this, be it their ways of working or the way they deliver their products, right? Some have done that really well, and some have done that badly, not because the people in those organizations are less good, but because they're set in a structure that is rigid, right? And they're finding that they can't do the things they need to be able to do because the organizational culture and policies and structures don't support that, right? And you can really tell those who've been able to respond quickly and those that haven't. So yeah, fully agree. Right? Whether you call it agile or not, it's an ability to respond with agility.
Yeah. And I mean, just a ponder point on that, I wonder whether some organizations have, this has been like a real shock to the system for a lot of organizations. And I wonder whether organizations have had to overcome bureaucracy and something. They've had to essentially say, well, we're not going to follow that because otherwise we just won't get stuff done in time. Whether actually, that might have rewired some organisations in permanently, but that remains to be seen. But okay, so our first question comes from Hertja, and we're
Hertja.
I always try and pronounce Hertja's name as best.
Apple. We'll call it Apple. She likes to be called Apple.
Lynn also knows Hertja, good friend of ours. So, and Hertja says organisations think they're getting more agility by applying things like SAFE, which in Hertja's opinion is primarily aimed at developing software. Any tips on how to start with business agility? And she also says, just call me Apple. She's added another
I knew that Apple would bring in a good question. We've had plenty of conversations around the SAFE framework, and I know that Karim will want to answer this as well. I think the trouble is people fall back on SAFE and they think it means business agility. It doesn't. It means scaled agile from a software environment. While there are constructs within SAFE that would enable business agility, it's not really set up or wired for that. It doesn't. It talks about how you do business change to implement SAFE, but it doesn't really talk about how you manage change from the products and services produced from the framework. And it doesn't really cover the whole holistic viewpoint. It's really about scaling agile from a software perspective. That's where it's come from. That's not to say you couldn't get a lot out of it. And it does have some of the constructs in there around leadership and culture. I know it's got the lean agile leadership and things like that in there, and it's got some really great stuff in there. But I think falling back on that on its own, and also the implementation of it is never implemented in the way it was intended. It's supposed to be a whole organizational thing, and what you find is an individual project tries to implement SAFE within an organization, and that sort of falls down a little bit, so you don't get all of the full benefits of the SAFE framework.
For sure, right? And to be fair to SAFE, it is not a business agility framework, right? It is a product delivery, product development framework that is designed to allow multiple teams to collaborate to deliver on it. But that being said, because Scrum is the same, right? Scrum is a product development framework, as is LESS, as are all of them. Now, the point is that none of these frameworks work on their own. That's the point of a framework. It isn't enough. People talk about Scrum isn't enough, you need to do this. Yeah, you need to do a whole bunch of stuff. So very quickly, I don't want this to be a slidey webinar, but I want to flash one thing up because I think that it's potentially going to shed some light and help me answer this question and maybe shed some light. So let me share my screen. And are you able to see that?
Yes.
That picture.
The 6 enablers, yeah.
This is a model I've used for a while, actually. So I call it the 6 enablers of business agility, right? What SAFE addresses is largely enabler 6 there on the left, ways of working. It's processes, practices, frameworks. And lots of people will send, and the same is true of Scrum, by the way. I'm not picking on SAFE, but that was what was mentioned, right? The same is true of all of these things. They focus on those ways of working. Unless somebody is focusing on deep change around leadership and management, and Lynn, you touched on that, right? Leading in a different way. How are we finding ways to decentralize authority, right? To create that alignment and get out of people's way and focus on the system and grow people around you. How are we focusing on culture and making that? How are we getting the structure of the organization right, moving away from silos? Are we focusing on creating policies for engagement or compliance? How's our HR? Is it still industrial revolution or is it now? Right? Is it about modern organizations that innovate? And finally, we get our governance, portfolio management, funding and investment practices right, or we fix scope, fix time, deliveries, right? So for me, those frameworks address one of 6 areas. If you're not approaching the other 5, then you're going to find that you fail. And this is why we see complaints, oh, Agile doesn't work here, Scrum didn't work, SAFE doesn't work. No, not if you don't attach those other 5 things. If they remain unchanged, you don't stand a chance. So that's kind of show that to leaders, because I want them to understand this is the size of the problem you have. Right? And here are some solutions that address one area. What are you doing in the other areas? So I agree. SAFE can work if you do the other things well.
Yeah. Fantastic. That's a great slide, Karim. Really, sort of insightful. So, so our next question comes from Fabricio, who asks whether either of you know these 2 different publications about business agility, and if so, how do you see them, or what your views on them are. So there's the Domains of Business Agility from the Business Agility Institute, and there's the Business Agility Manifesto, which is John Zachman, Roger Bolton, and Ron Ross.
I'm not familiar with the latter, if I'm honest. I'm familiar with the Domains of Business Agility, because I used to call that model the 6 Domains of Business Agility. And when Evan and the Business Agility Institute came out with that, I actually changed it to the 6 Impediments. And then I thought, why am I being so negative? And I changed it to the 6 Enablers. Okay, so yeah, I'm familiar with Evan's approach. I like it. I do, and there's good stuff in there. It's good content. I choose to group it in a different way, but I think if you look at what the Business Agility Institute have created there, and you act on that stuff, you'll be in a good place. It's just I tend to organize it the way I showed you, but I very much like what the Business Agility Institute is doing. I like the Domains of Business Agility. I can't speak for the Business Agility Manifesto because I haven't seen it. I'm going to go and look that up tonight, though. Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking the same. I can imagine, though, with those authors whom I'm familiar with, that it's around the concepts of like enterprise architecture.
Yes, it is.
And probably got a heavy focus on business architecture. If that is the case, then I would say that's very important. I think business architecture is a misunderstood discipline, but a very important one for organizations to be agile. I mean, how are you going to scale or change or adapt if you don't even know what you do now or how you do it now? And I think the business architecture is quite pivotal in helping organizations achieve business agility. So I will be looking that up, and I hope it's around that.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, so let's move on to a slightly different topic, which is if an organization wants to achieve agility, how? Like, again, I mean, this is another one of those nice small questions, but I suppose a different way of framing that is how could they start? How could an organization start?
I'm going to let you start on this one, Lynn.
No, that's fine. That's very polite of you. Well, I can say I'm going to start by saying where I wouldn't start. I wouldn't start by introducing small teams. I think I would start by getting the what I call the hygiene factors in place. Things like really understanding what it means for leaders, getting coaching in place for leaders so they understand their role as leaders within the organization. Because I'm not saying that business agility is a top-down thing, but if it's not being practiced across the organization, and well, actually, I don't even mean coaching leaders, I mean coaching in general across an organization. Business agility actually spans hierarchies. It doesn't care about hierarchy. It's really across the piece. And you can put in all the methods and tools and all the things you like in the world in place. But if you don't have the culture or the leadership styles in place to start with, then I don't think you can achieve it. I think you can go further by focusing on mindset, culture, teamwork, things like look at where you have blockers for empowering individuals, servant leadership, understanding the team culture that already exists and unpicking that through strong leadership and team ethos and things like that, and team cultures. And for me, that's really, really important in terms of helping an organization start. I think the other thing as well we often forget is having a vision. It's really, really key that organizations have some sort of vision. They know it's not about having a fixed vision. It's not about saying, you know, this is where we're going to be in 5 years' time, but at least having a go at it and having a vision that can evolve as you learn. And, you know, that's that learning organizational culture that you want to embed within the organization.
Fantastic. And so what I'm hearing, if I'm understanding you correctly there, Lynn, is actually quite a lot about people.
Definitely.
You know, very little actually about method.
Yeah, I think if you have, and I've always said this, if you have an agile mindset, or you have the leadership concepts that sit behind agile as a mindset, and the people who in the organization have that mindset, you can be agile anyway. You don't need them. I think a lot of the methods there are to guide people and to help people adhere to agile principles and values. But actually, if you live and breathe those agile principles and values, you can be agile in anything you do. It doesn't really matter.
Let me get this right, Lynn. You're saying that we should focus on individuals and interactions over processes.
Quite right. Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. But it's funny because so I agree with you. By the way, for me, I don't like this whole top-down, bottom-up thing. But a lot of the changes that need to be made to enable this stuff to work around the culture, around the leadership styles, around the governance, around organizational structures. There's just no way those changes come from anywhere other than the most senior leadership. So you have to start there, and leaders need to change the way they show up, the way they behave, right? And the policies need to change to enable, like for example, a culture of experimentation, right? If you don't allow people to fail, they'll never take risks or experiment. So you've got to put that in place. It starts with why, right? We should always start with why. What problem are we trying to solve? And then that goes back to the vision thing you talked about, right? And how are we going to know we've been successful, or at least have moved in the right direction? Because if we're not measuring anything, and it's just guesswork. Right? So we've got to get that stuff in place. Then we need to have a conversation about all the kind of roughly the high level changes we need to make, who we need to bring on board, what the obstacles are, who is driving this, and ideally the most senior leadership, who is going to move stuff out of the way when we see it, right? And where are we starting? Because you're right, if you try and do all of the teams at once, it's going to be too much. So you've got to get those things in place before you even think about which frameworks, which processes, which tools are we going to. That's down the road, right? Based on the outcome you're trying to achieve and the culture of the organization now and desired. So there's a ton of work to do before you even get there.
And I think one of the hardest things in all of that is, we know that the culture takes the longest to change. And therefore, starting there is a good thing, because you don't want to do that after, because you could waste loads and loads of money putting in lots of methods and tools and all of these things. But if the culture hasn't changed, it's all for no good reason anyway. It will fail. So we do it, but that's not tangible. It's all of the things that you can't see. They're all the intangible things, and nobody really buys into that. So it is, as Karim says, it's really important to find success measurements in terms of those I say they're intangible. You can find ways to measure them, but they're different, softer ways to measure them, to sort of think about success, rather than trying to do things which are on the surface, if you like, that you can see and touch, which maybe give you less overall benefit longer term.
Yeah, we'll take another question in a moment, but just before we do, on that question of culture, because I know that's always culture generally is somewhat of a controversial point, I think, in the change community generally, in terms of how much it can be changed and whether it can be deliberately changed or whether it emerges, for example. So, I guess Karim or Lynn, whoever wants to have a view on this, like how or can we change culture, in your view?
Yes, absolutely. Organizations can change culture. If you look at, and one of probably the most famous culture change study is the Toyota General Motors partnership that created NUMMI, right, which was 1986, I think, right, where they managed to change one of the most toxic and horrible cultures almost in a few months. They turned it around. And for me, that's extreme, but you see it again on David Marquet with his book, Turn the Ship Around, and you see it time and time again. How you change culture is dependent on behaviors, right? A culture emerges based off the behaviors that people exhibit. Now, how do you change people's behaviors? You change policies, you change incentives, you change rules, you change artifacts, right? Yeah. Small example, you throw away, I think it was GM again, right? You throw away the 19-page guidance on dress code and just replace it with dress appropriately, right? That small change will have a huge, and lots of those will start to change behaviors. Once behaviors change, mindsets change. Once mindsets change, cultures change, right? So you can't go in and say, I want this culture and pick it out of a magazine. What you can do is have an idea about the kind of culture you want to see and then start to make tangible policy changes, structural changes around the behaviors you want to see that might lead to that, and then measure and inspect and adapt frequently. That would be at a high level what I would say.
And also, this comes down to resilience, because to do that, you need to reward good behaviours, or you reward the behaviours you want to see. You find ways to reward those behaviours, and you find ways to challenge yet empathise with the behaviours you don't want to see. But to do that, you need to have psychological safety in place. Who's going to call out the exec when they're exhibiting behaviours which aren't according to the new ways of working or the behaviours that are expected of the organisation? How resilient is that person going to be to being called out by somebody who's a lot more junior than them? So it is about putting all of those things in place as well, and understanding what it means to put those policies in place. It's not about the management deciding what everyone else needs to do. It's about how they want to behave and how they adapt and work within the organisation as a whole, everyone.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I'd say, if I may, just quickly, because I want to give one or two examples to make this tangible, a bit more tangible, right? Because I get this question so frequently. And one is, how do leaders show up? Does a leader put their hand up and say, I need help, I got this wrong, I made a mistake? Because if you're expecting others to do that, but yet you're not doing it, the message you're sending is, don't make a mistake, don't get it wrong, and therefore don't take risks, and therefore you'll never do anything interesting, right? So, and then there'll never be psychological safety or the safety to do anything, right? So you've got to walk the walk, right? You can't just say, "Oh, go away." And another one is around, why don't our people collaborate more? Why aren't we only have a culture of collaboration? You go into the HR policies and you see they're stack ranking people against each other, and they have individual incentives, right? Of course, they're not going to do that. They're behaving rationally in the system you've created. Change the system, change the incentives, you will see very different behaviors, and you'll see a different culture emerge, right? But that's something you can do as a leader every single day.
Yeah.
On top of that as well, Karim, I've seen instances within organisations where the management don't want to let go of management. So they'll say they use the walk or they talk the talk, but when it comes to actually empowering staff, they put controls around it and go back to management. So they don't want to. They want the outcome from it. In fact, I think this goes into something of what Simon's saying in his question. They want the outcome of business agility, but they don't really understand how to stop managing and start being leaders and empowering and allowing devolved decision making at a level which doesn't include them.
Because it's not easy, right? Because
no, it's not easy.
They don't know how to do that, and they don't know what that looks like. And that's why leadership coaching and development is absolutely vital as a kind of a pillar of this, to enable it. Because it's easy to say, just make the team self-organized. But you've got to put the right conditions in place for that to happen, or it won't happen, or it will happen in a way you don't want it to happen. So you've got to put those constraints, those enabling constraints in place, and that's not easy, right?
Absolutely. And I know one phrase which I've always quite has resonated with me around culture is, you basically cultivate it, right? You can sort of purposefully change it in a way because it's going to emerge, but you create the conditions in which the change can happen. And just to add to those examples, one thing that always strikes me, I used to work for a large financial services company that had a habit of putting lots of internal non-disclosure agreements in place and then talking about issues with communication. And admittedly, this was towards the end of my time there when I was pretty sure I was going to at some point move on, even though I continue to really enjoy working there. I just refused to sign them. And I sort of thought, well, what's the worst that could happen if I don't sign these internal NDAs? And it turns out nothing. Like, you still work on the project, but I just pointed out, well, look, actually, this says I can't disclose it with anyone else unless someone else has signed an NDA, but there's no insider list. So I have no way, this is unenforceable. Why are you asking me to do it? And anyway, I just think sometimes you get caught up in a culture where it's like secrecy, it's hiding information. But okay, so let's move on to some questions. So Hertje says it's a wonderful example with the 6 enablers. Completely agree. So again, fantastic, and thank you for sharing those, Karim. Milena says, Lynn, how could you relate the Agile Manifesto for business improvement from Agile and business analysis and business agility?
This is a really good question, Milena, because I probably haven't picked that book up for a good 6 months, and you're testing my memory on what that Agile Manifesto for business improvement has. But I can guarantee that if it's in the book that myself and Deborah Paul wrote, that it will be based on the Lean Agile concepts. And I'm hoping that you will find that I've already answered it in some of the things I just talked about. If I haven't, then please come back and ask another question.
It's always funny when you write a book, isn't it? There's a period after it's
So
published.
quote page 7. You're like, oh.
There's a period after it's published where you never want to see the thing again because you've read it and reread it and had it copy edited. But, so Simon asks, very few organisations would say they don't want business agility. Many seem to fail to get there. What do you think they're the biggest mistakes that they're making? And if I make this more general and say, what are some common blockers? So building on springboarding from what Simon says there, what are the blockers you see? I know we've discussed some of them, but other suggestions?
I can certainly share some that I've seen. So I won't. So the first one I normally go with is too narrow a focus, right? Just focusing on processes and Scrum. We've done that, so I won't go into that again. Firstly, what I'll say, the wrong people driving the change. Right? You can't have a mid-level manager drive this through, because the chances of them having the authority to make the changes they need to make are all but zero. So you have to have this, and then I hear, well, you have to have buy-in from leadership. You don't have to have buy-in from leadership. They need to be the ones who want this. They need to be the ones who want this so badly they can almost taste it and are driving it actively, right? So you have to have that. And middle manager resistance is such a big thing, right? And Lynn, you touched on it. People don't want to give up that authority. They don't, largely because of the middle management incentives. Mm-hmm. Their incentives are such that I want this empire, I want this control, because that's how I get my respect, that's how I progress, that's how I get my bonus. So if that stays in place, of course they won't cooperate. They won't ever cooperate until their incentives change. And if you say, actually, if you exhibit these behaviors, it's now going to hinder your progress rather than help you to climb the greasy pole. These are the behaviors we need to see from you now, and these are what you're going to be rewarded on. I think that those incentives for middle managers are absolutely vital, and the constant removal of blockers. The last thing I'll say, because I do a lot of work on strategy, right? And for me, strategy is a description of a problem you'd like to solve, and then a coherent set of consciously designed changes to enable it. And we have too much of a scattergun approach with these transformations. So I hire some coaches, you do some stuff over there, you do some stuff over there, but no coherence around the whole of these changes all going to interact in this way to give us this outcome. We haven't given enough thought to how the system operates with each other. So we'll make some changes over there, but are they compatible or incompatible with this other stuff? So someone with that holistic view, taking a strategic approach to business agility, is absolutely vital, or it's just going to be scattergun. So I say they're the key ones that I see.
Yeah, and Karim, as you were saying that, I was thinking, so first of all, the definition of strategy there, it reminded me of Rummelt's definition in Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which is something like a coherent response to an important challenge. Yeah. Don't check that. It's something like that, but off the top of my head. And but I was also thinking about when you were talking about that holism, and I mean, my background is business analysis, but actually that's what a good, experienced strategic someone with business analysis thinking can bring to the party. Perhaps is actually to encourage the thinking to be elevated up a level and to take the top level view as well as the detailed view. So Lynn, what would you add to that?
Well, I was going to come into that. I spent most of my career as a senior BA working in that space, trying to pull it together, using things like value streams, trying to move across the silos to look at customer journeys all the way through the organization. And I think some of the blockers that I see is empires, isn't it? These siloed empires where you have the person that's responsible for that empire wants to make the controls and decisions around that, but isn't looking around what happens downstream by making those changes, or adopting or changing in that way, and how it affects other elements of the organization. They're not pulling together as an organization and considering, if I do that service, what happens to that when I pass it on, and how does it affect other areas? And actually that affects the whole agility of the organization. And I think this comes back to what I said earlier about business architecture, that if you understand how information and value, well, I say value, it's not value really, but how things flow through the organization in order for value to be obtained by the customer or the consumer, bearing in mind that value is only recognized at point of consumption and not at point of, not during that chain, then I think it gives a very different view. And I spend a lot of time working with seniors challenging those opinions and challenging that mindset, so we can get that full across the business view of what they're trying to do, and then think about, well, who are the people, the skills, the gaps, the products, the services that align with all of that. Because without knowing that, how can you easily adapt it or change it if you don't know what you've got to start with?
Knowing what we've got to start with, and not, I mean, it's interesting because you mentioned value there, and my mind went to probably off on a bit of a tangent here, Lynn, but understanding of stakeholder and customers and what they actually value. And an observation I've made is that some organisations in what they're calling digital transformation is actually just moving the boundary of automation, so the customer does more of the work, right?
Yes.
Which is okay, because sometimes actually, I would much rather make a hotel reservation on the internet than ring someone up, and I'm happy to type that in. But in other situations, you get the sense where somebody's thinking that they're wanting customer intimacy, where the customer, I don't really want to be intimate with my energy supplier type of thing, but my energy supplier is forever emailing me, say, download this app so you can really easily submit your meter readings. It's like, look, making a meter reading doesn't excite me, and I'm not going to download an app to do it. So do you think there's an element of like true customer insight that comes into all of this as well?
Absolutely. And I think this comes back to service thinking and service science. And, I was talking to my husband a few weeks ago, when we were booking a holiday, actually, last year, not this year, obviously. And with all the funds gone out of it now, I would like a service that I can give my requirements to, and people come up with my suggestions. The amount of time and effort it takes to think about where you want to go, and make it the best holiday, because now it's my responsibility to do it, not an experienced travel agency. And that's about that customer experience again. It's about where are the innovations in the industry now that really puts the customer first. We're all time shy, yet we're doing more and more of all of this work in our own spare time, and it's taking the fun out of it. And I think those organizations that can adapt and change and really understand their customer from the customer's perspective are the ones that are going to fly in this ever-changing world.
Absolutely.
So innovation it's either about solving a problem that hasn't been solved, or it's about solving a problem that has been solved in a new and novel way. Yeah. For example, what's so innovative about what Uber did, right? They get you from A to B. Taxis existed already. The problem they solved had been solved, but they solved it better, right? Well, most would believe that they solved it better, whatever we might think of them, right? I want to get from A to B. And so this goes back to, what's the customer job to be done? Don't ask the customer for the solution. That's not their job. They know what they want to achieve. They know what they want to accomplish. They know the pain points. Now you go away and you find a new innovative way that solves my problem for me that I'm going to want to pay for, right? And Uber did that, and Amazon does that brilliantly. And so many people do that well. But most organizations really struggle to do that because they get so stuck in this mentality of, these are our products. How do we make them better? How do you solve the problem in a completely different way?
Yes.
Right? And that's innovation, and that's customer focus. But to do that, you have to truly understand the customers and what they're trying to achieve and get in their shoes. And that takes time, and that takes effort. That takes business analysis.
Yeah. And just to echo that point, something that James and Suzanne Robertson wrote in, I think, their book, Business Analysis Agility, there's a line where they write something along the lines of, like, digital transformation isn't just rewriting your COBOL stack in Java, right? It's not just like, it's, but we laugh, right? But there are organizations that kind of do that, aren't they? Like, well, let's reverse engineer the old system and then just create it in a new code base. It's like, well, that's not transformation. That's just like maintenance, really. So,
not transformation. It's incremental improvement.
Yeah.
Like, and if
you
you're
should
still
do
measuring
anyway.
the same metrics before and after, you haven't transformed. You've got a bit better, and maybe that's what you were going for, but it's not a transformation.
Yeah.
And it's not going to keep organizations alive. It's not going to keep giving them a seat at the table when their competitors are doing other things. So I think business agility is much wider, much bigger. And I think we can throw in lean in here as well, because I think so many, while efficiency and effectiveness is critical, we do need to think about that. Even in an innovative new solution, we need to make it lean. Just applying lean to what we already do isn't going to give you that innovation.
Yeah, there was
ideas, but
Yeah, there was and I can't, I forgive me, I can't remember the name of the speaker, but there was someone, I think it was like a World Economic Forum speech or someone. It really struck me that he said, in the new normal, it's not the biggest fish, it's the fastest fish. And like we've all heard those type of statements before, but that really resonated with me, that actually size is not necessarily the biggest issue. So okay, so let's take a few more questions and comments. So Minaxi has a comment. So maybe we should exercise a culture of continuous learning and acceptance of failure. So maybe failing fast for the right reasons as well. I think that's a very, very well observed comment about the sort of failing fast and failing forward. Sorry, say again?
And failing cheaply.
Yes, absolutely. Very, very quickly.
Failure, the more experiments you can run and the better chance you have of succeeding. So yeah, I fully agree with that. Thank you.
Yeah. And Michelle asks, can a team trialing an agile delivery method ever be successful without the surrounding business agility? It sounds as if agility has to be implemented in a very waterfall way before any agile test and learn can take place. Any thoughts on that one?
I don't think it needs to be implemented in a very waterfall way. If you're thinking, Michelle, when we talk about a vision, it means about having a documented vision that we've got, measurable benefits and things like that, and we've got a plan. I think having a vision that evolves is very different to having a plan to implementing a vision. So a vision is something which should evolve, and actually what we should be doing is testing and learning success measures. I think that includes failing, and I think we don't fail on the big stuff. We fail on the small things. So you're not going to take a £3 million project and then start failing on big implementations of that. You're going to be failing on small things and provide a culture of embedding a learning, continuous learning organization that understands that failing on small things is okay. And so I think it's about evolving agility and not doing it waterfall.
So there isn't anything wrong with having a high level plan. You should have a high level plan. You just replan every time you learn new stuff, right? Because whilst we don't know exactly what the solution looks like in every organization, because it's different based on the unique context, there are patterns that we can have a good idea. Like for example, if you're in functional silos, we probably know we want to move some way towards cross-functionality, right? And a network of interconnected teams rather than a hierarchical pyramid. We have that pattern that we've seen work over and over again. Now, what that looks like in your organization, we might not have the details, but we kind of know, right? And what I would say, we did this at Barclays, right? We were there, we were changing a bunch of stuff. It's one of the few places that really reinvented its governance process to enable this, right? I was there for sort of 12 to 18 months while they were doing it. They carried on doing it after I left, right? But what they did is they didn't say, right, here's our £1.1 billion portfolio of spend, let's reinvent everything, right? They said, let's take one product that has 5 teams delivering value against it, and let's get them working differently. Let's get them cross-functional. Let's get them working on continuous delivery and reprioritizing based on a business side product owner with quarterly OKRs, and then review whether we keep investing or not. Everything else stays the same. And we learn from that, and then we incrementally roll that out. So we want to learn, we can't do everything at once. So the kind of waterfall approach is too risky in change, just like it's too risky in product development.
And just to bring in another question there, I'm going to skip ahead to a different question from Robin, because Robin asks, could you expand on what needs to change in the governance and funding space to enable agility? And Karim, you sort of touched upon governance then, so I was wondering whether there's anything else you could share on that.
Yes, but in the interest of time, I'll try to keep it snappy. So here's the thing, right? You want a governance approach that is coherent with the kind of work you're doing. If the kind of work you're doing is utterly predictable, then go with the big upfront business case and fixed scope, and then track your progress against the plan you have. If you're creating the new, it's inherently uncertain and unknowable. So you better run a ton of small experiments, get customer data, lean startup, design thinking, whatever you want to call it, right? Business model canvas, lean canvas, validate the problem to be solved quickly, easily, cheaply. Validate that your solution solves the problem. Validate the business model that you put around it. Validate you have the capability to deliver it. all quickly, easily, and cheaply, all in kind of incremental funding cycles, such that if you demonstrate there's a need to keep investing, we'll give you a bit more. All right, and maybe it starts with a few £100 and it goes up to a few £1,000, rather than here's 10 million, go away and build it, and let's cross our fingers and hope it's the right thing. So it's that level. And by the way, this is where pivot, persevere or kill comes in. If we learn that there's no market for this, kill it. If we learn that there is a market, but actually it needs to look a bit different, then pivot, right? And that's where it comes from. And then once you've validated that, you start growing it out. Maybe you start investing instead of on a weekly or 2 weekly cadence. Maybe you start giving quarterly investments and say, let's see what you've done in a quarter, just like a venture capitalist firm would. And as you get less and less uncertainty and risk, you can ramp up the amount you're funding and the cycles over which you do it. So that is very different to how most organizations do things. They like to mitigate the risk through upfront business case and analysis, but we know that doesn't work when there's high level of uncertainty and complexity. So in a nutshell, it's that stuff. I'd love to talk more, but just pick the approach that's appropriate to the level of uncertainty you have.
I think I'd just like to add to that as well, because at the beginning of a project or a program or a partnership or a contract, you're just guessing. Nobody knows what the answer is. It's just a guess. All these ideas are just ideas. They are ideas and concepts that have not been brought to reality yet. Therefore, we don't know what the outcome is. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for procurement and things like that to start thinking about outcomes rather than about plans. Yeah. And I think if we focused on outcomes and broke those outcomes down into small, manageable outcomes, that allows the organizations they're partnering with to actually test and learn and test that hypothesis and get feedback early to see whether you want to continue or whether you don't want to continue. But we build these we're building these big contracts, which goes right against the grain with contract negotiation as one of the Agile Manifesto values. Yeah. So, and I think we've got to avoid big upfront contracts which are based on guessing. It's not a guessing game. It's a lot of money to put on a guess.
Yeah, and a lot of what you were both talking about there, I think, Karim, you mentioned lean startup. I think the term, I mean, it's been a while since I've read it, it's sort of validated learning or something around that, having and again, I guess it comes back, Lynn, to we were talking about us understanding the customer's perception on how they're going to realize value. Well, that's a hypothesis until someone's bought it and has realized that value. So small throwaway experiments. And I was also thinking as you were both talking there, and I'm using this outside of the context that it's intended, I'm sure, but in so Dave Snowden's Cynefin framework, and he talks about safe to fail probes, where you essentially you put a probe in and if it works, you make it bigger, you invest more of it. If it doesn't, then you put the brakes on, type of thing. So lots of interesting sort of intersections there. So I'll move on to the next question, which is also from Robin. Robin says, what are the Agile principles or values that you think are most important for leadership to get to be able to start the journey to business agility? So what are the most important Agile principles that leaders need to get? Any thoughts on that one, Lynn?
Well, I'll start with the values. I don't think I can single out any of the values as not being important to leadership. I think they're all important on that concept. I think you can look at each one and put a leadership slant on it. Even working software, over comprehensive documentation. That's all about testing the hypothesis and learning. You can put that into a business context of learning around what the business is trying to achieve rather than through software. In fact, I sometimes wish that Agile Manifesto said working solutions, not software, actually. Yeah. In terms of the principles, I think there's one of the ones I come back to, which I think a lot of people don't get, is simplification. It's the art of maximizing the amount of work not done.
Yes.
And I think from a business agility point of view, I think that's really key. And most of the time I'm working with organizations, and when I actually look at the number of change initiatives they've got underway, at one organization and one client I was working with, 156 running in parallel across a workforce of about 50, 60 staff, and wondered why they were never completing anything. And I think the art of simplification, maximizing the amount of work that you're not doing. So even just going in there and going, you can't achieve this, prioritizing it and then figuring out what you're not going to do is as important as agreeing what you are going to do. So that's something I hold quite dear, I think, in terms of business agility.
And as you were speaking there, Lynn, I was thinking back to Karim's comment about pivot, persevere, or kill. Because actually, if you've got that in place, you probably wouldn't have 156 initiatives running in parallel. You'd have far fewer.
I spend a lot of my time saying just do one or two things well.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left, so we'll go through as many of the questions as we can. I'm just going to take one from the very bottom, actually, because it sort of links into what we were talking about. Michelle asks, do you think that COVID-19 will make leaders reluctant to embrace lean principles? Will we see a change from just in time to just in case?
Lean, the term lean gets used in so many ways, because I mean, obviously you've got where it came from, which is lean manufacturing, lean production, the Toyota production system, really, right?
Yeah.
Which is addressing a largely predictable problem of manufacturing the same car we've manufactured many times. You've then got lean product development, which is kind of what we're talking about, which is embracing that uncertainty, right? And the lean startup. You've then got you've got lean thinking and lean management, right? So for me, I hope not, right? Because if ever these principles were needed more, I can't think of a time, right? Whether it's embracing people or just in time, or just allowing the ability to empower your workforce. That's one of the key tenets of lean. Actually, the two key tenets are respect for people and continuous improvement. And during this time, do we need to respect people less, and do we need to continue to improve less? I don't think so. As with agility, I think this has shown us that the way we were doing it for years is even more broken than we thought, and we need more of this. We need more lean, we need more agility, and that's how you create it. So I really hope not, but I guess that remains to be seen.
Yeah. I guess if I could just come in on that as well, I think it's what are they trying to achieve? I mean, this comes back to what problem are we trying to solve? Why are we doing this? And if the answer is, well, we won't go for business agility, what are they trying to achieve, and how do they hope to achieve it in a different way from what we're discussing? Because maybe they're onto something that we've completely missed. But Simon said earlier in his comment, people want the outcome of business agility, but they often fail. And I think it's because they just don't know where to start or how to get there. It is a big thing. It's a huge undertaking, but it doesn't have to be, it's don't eat the elephant whole, isn't it? We need a carpaccio here, and we need to sort of take it in small slices and work towards that goal, that vision of what the outcome is, what they want to achieve, rather than trying to do it big bang. Big bang will just have people running for the hills. Nobody likes big bang approaches to change or transformation. It triggers the fight or flight aspect in people, which means they'll just turn off, or that they'll turn, they're just not going to engage with it. So it's got to be small slices of change and continuous over a number of years. We're not talking quick fixes here. And I think that the trouble is, if people are in roles and jobs where they're looking for their reward system, which is the annual appraisal, they want to see tangible things. We've got to change that culture of having tangible success criteria and having more intangible success criteria.
Yeah, absolutely. Just springboarding from a more general thought from what we've just discussed there about, because one thing that was springing to mind is, like I think what this has demonstrated is it doesn't matter what risk planning you do, there's always going to be something that can, and yes, you can have scenario plans in place that that could cover this, but actually the need to be able to respond to something which was unknowable is probably more understood now than ever. And the other element that strikes me is, if organizations really aren't able to, like this is going to hit, I can't think of many organizations this isn't going to have a big financial hit on, in terms of reserves, for example, particularly if they're having to pay staff or furlough workforce or whatever. And you sort of think, well, actually, if there's less on the balance sheet, then they just won't survive. I mean, they just won't, if they're not able to adapt. The fat is gone. So I think we maybe we're in for, and I wouldn't wish that on any organisation, but maybe we're in for a bit of a restructure of some markets. But
this happens. So nature does this, right? Nature favors the big, right? And that's why animals get bigger and bigger and bigger over time. Evolution favors the bigger because they can cover bigger distances, find food, protect themselves from predators, right? But the counterbalance nature has is extinction events. And 66 million years ago, we saw a prime example of that. The Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event, a meteor hit us. 75% of life on the planet wiped out. Who survived? It was the small creatures, the nimble, the adaptive. And business does the same, right? You get bigger, you get bigger, you get bigger, then the world changes around you and you die, and the more nimble, smaller ones come up, and then they get bigger, and then the world changes and they die, and it's the order of things. Right? It's just how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so our next question is from Minaxi, who asks, how much time should be spent on culture evaluation with respect to agile mindset from a business analysis perspective for any project initiative? Really tricky question to answer with an absolute number, I'm sure, but any general advice on how much time should be spent on evaluating culture with regards to agile mindset?
I wouldn't want to put a time on it. I think I'd want to find ways to have success measures that I could work towards, for instance. Change is a really difficult thing. It's about an individual's journey. You can't, changing a workforce starts with one person. It doesn't start with a team. It starts with the individuals within that team. Each individual goes on that change journey by themselves. They might go alongside, but everyone changes at different rates. So they, in terms of the response to change, somebody might be in acceptance while somebody else is still in denial within the same team, and they might be a functioning team. So I don't know if we can put a time on it. Somebody might take 12 months to accept change, whereas somebody else might accept it within 2 weeks. And I think it's very difficult to put a time limit on that. I think what's important is to understand that it's an individual journey and that every individual has to go on that change. There are some good change methodologies around there. One of the ones that CMC uses is ProSci. It says, don't start with knowledge. It has the ADKAR model. So it says knowledge is actually about training. And I think a lot of the time we go straight into training people. We forget about making some awareness of why change is important, giving them some desire to change before we even start thinking about knowledge, their ability to apply that knowledge or use that knowledge or change, and then their resistance. How do we manage resistance to change as well? So I think there's some good models out there, but I wouldn't feel comfortable putting a time limit on it. I think if you're saying how long does it change to change an organization, I think you're definitely in the 3 to 5 years. If you're in an organization of about 1,000 people, I can't imagine. I've been working on the same project in the civil service now, the same area, for the last 2 years, and we're still evolving our journey, and we're still nowhere near where we need to be, and that's 2 years down the line.
You will never stop evolving. The day you stop evolving is the day the organization doesn't exist, right? It's actually pretty quick to do a culture assessment, or I could bang one of those out in a day with the most senior leadership. It's like, here's where you are, here's where you want to be. But that's interesting. But the more interesting thing is the ongoing levels of engagement within the team. And in my organization, we use a tool called Office Vibe. It takes a temperature check every week. Right? Once a week, it asks you 5 easy questions, and then it gives you a dashboard. It's like, here's where you're getting better, here's where you're struggling. Right? But that should never end. That should be something you always do, because people go, people join. In 3 to 5 years, you actually might move the goalposts. So it doesn't stop. It never stops. You can do it quickly, but it's just an ongoing process that should just become the new normal.
And I think that's really important, Karim, because I think what you're getting there is that individual view of it. You're not getting the and you can pull that together and look at it from an organizational context, but you're actually focusing on the individuals, and it's only individuals that change an organization.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I'm sure we could carry on talking about this for, I was going to say hours, probably days, but a fascinating topic. So just before we close, if you were to think about, like, in 20, 30 seconds or less, if there's one thing that you'd like people to take away from this, or like the most significant thing you think that people should be thinking about, what would that thing be? So Karim, I'm going to put you on the spot first, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so the one thing. So if I were to teach a workshop to leadership, the thing I want them to take away from this is, like, you cannot survive like you could back 100 years ago by doing the same thing a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better. This is not Henry Ford making the Model T on a production line, right, for 20 years. In order to survive and thrive, you need to keep the lights on, and you need to create the new, and you need to set up separate structures and policies and leadership and cultures on each of those different sides to make them work well. And to do that, you need to touch on almost every part of the organization, and narrow focus is going to fail. Okay, so you need to focus on so many other areas that we've touched on and more. I don't think this is a small change. You've got to get the whole organization on board.
Yeah, fantastic. So don't underestimate the scale of it. Fantastic. Lynn?
I definitely echo what Karim said. I think I'd also like to add in that it's, business agility is really about understanding the customer. As Karim said, it's not good enough just to improve your products and services, but to actually think about the service you offer. The service that you offer and how people experience that service could be the differentiator for you as an organization, rather than the product itself. All the, is how you interact with your customers. It is the whole organization, but that doesn't mean to say we have to eat the elephant whole. So think about implementing small changes, learning, and don't be afraid to fail small. And learn. Become a learning organization is paramount to becoming an agile organization.
Fantastic. Well, Lynn, that's a great place for us to pause and stop. So I am certain, Karim and Lynn, that people will want to stay in touch with you. They'll want to follow you. They'll want to know more about your work. So, so Lynn, how can people get in touch with you? How can they see the kind of stuff that you do?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn. They can also find CMC as Consult CMC. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter. We have a website, www.consultcmc.com. So please go there. You can find blogs and things that we've posted on there, and articles that we've written, and find points of contact. So feel free to go there.
Fantastic. And Karim?
Likewise, LinkedIn, you will find only one person with my name, so that's rather handy. I'm on there a bit too much. Same with Twitter. You can go to agilecenter.com as well. That's center spelled the English way, and RE at the end. Check out my blog. I've also just started a YouTube channel as well, so if you really want to see me babbling on for a video a week, you can sign up to that. And at some point this year, my book, The 6 Enablers of Business Agility, will land. And I cannot wait for that to be done. I finished the first draft. We're 3 to 4 months away. So if you're if that slide piqued your interest, there will be more detail coming on that. So check that out.
Fantastic. Well, excellent. Well, thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Karim, I mean, my head is spinning in a positive way with all of the things that we've discussed. And so massive thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here today. Also a massive thank you to everyone who has tuned in live, or indeed anyone who is watching the recording. So as a reminder, the idea behind these BA community webinars was really to not necessarily talk about the core of business analysis, because there are many other very, very good places where that happens, but perhaps to talk about some topics that are on the periphery, things that we're perhaps not talking about in the business analysis community as much as we might do. So with that in mind, certainly at the moment during the sort of COVID-19 lockdown period, rather than doing one a month, we're doing one a week. So when you exit this webinar, you'll see all the upcoming webinars. There's like 3 or 4 others that you can sign up for. You'll also either later today or tomorrow get a short email from me, which will have a link to a survey. I'd be really grateful if you could fill that in. Let me know what you think about the session. But also one of the really important questions on there is, what would you like to see in a future session? Because agile and agility was a topic that lots of people were requesting, so we were able to make that happen. If there's other topics you want to see, please do put them on there, and if I can find speakers and so forth, then we will make it happen. So thanks again to Lynn and Karim. Thanks to everyone tuning in. Have a fantastic rest of the day, and hope to see you all soon.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.